Hello, so I'm going to kick off our reading of the Ethics of Ambiguity in this video. So this is a really rich text that we're going to get all kinds of all kinds of insights out of. It's Beauvoir's first book-length substantial contribution to existentialist ethics, and also there's ontology going on in here. She talks about what it means to be human, and how human beings relate to the real, to reality, and so on. So there's a lot going on in a relatively short space. So I will be using and referring to this edition of the Ethics of Ambiguity by Open Road Media. It came out not that long ago, I think 2018. The translation in here is Bernard Frechtman's translation, so you might find this older by Citadel Press edition of the Ethics of Ambiguity. It's the same translation, but the page numbers are different. So if you have this older copy, the page numbers won't quite match what I'm referring to from this newer. This, I think, is maybe now a little more widely available. I'm not sure, but this is what I assigned in class, and this is what I'll be referring to throughout these videos, is that Open Road Media edition. So I think just to start, we have to get what is this ambiguity out there on the table. In Pyrrhus and Cineas, Beauvoir had raised the issue of ambiguity as an important one. There, she was more focused on the ambiguity of accomplishing an act. The end of an act is also a beginning, because you end one thing, and that end is the starting point of the next, of something else. And so the ambiguity there is the end is also a beginning, and a beginning and end, and so on. The idea, the general concept of ambiguity takes on increasing significance in Beauvoir's work, and here, of course, it features in the title, The Ethics of Ambiguity. Here, the ambiguity is more focused on human existence, where my very being is ambiguous because, on the one hand, I am a subject, I am conscious, I transcend myself in time toward a future that has not happened yet, where I might realize certain possibilities and so on. On the other hand, I also appear as an object. I am a body in the world. I have a past where particular events has happened to me. I'm part of a particular situation with specific people at a specific time and culture and place and all of this. So I have this element of facticity about me, right? Just the kind of hard material, objective facts of my existence that appear to me object-like. I look down, here's my body, I see my hand, like an object in the world. So a large part of the Ethics of Ambiguity is attempting to work out the ethical and philosophical implications of this ambiguity. At the very beginning, she says, a new paradox is introduced into his destiny. Rational animal, thinking reed, he escapes from his natural condition without, however, freeing himself from it. He is still a part of this world, of which he is a consciousness. He asserts himself as a pure internality, against which no external power can take hold, and he also experiences himself as a thing, crushed by the dark weight of other things. At every moment, he can grasp the non-temporal truth of his existence, that between the past which is no longer and the future which is not yet, this moment when he exists is nothing. This privilege which he alone possesses of being a sovereign and a unique subject amidst a universe of objects is what he shares with all his fellow men. In turn, an object for others, he is nothing more than an individual in the collectivity on which he depends. So there is a very, I think, clear statement of the basic ambiguity between subject and object, just on the very first page. Now, this ambiguity at the heart of our existence is something that we cannot overcome. So Beauvoir is not in any way going to try to like resolve this ambiguity or eliminate it in any way. And in fact, she says, the very next point she makes is, we too often try to do just that. The history of philosophy is philosophers trying to get around or ignore this ambiguity. It has been a matter of eliminating the ambiguity by making oneself pure inwardness or pure externality, by escaping from the sensible world or by being engulfed in it, by yielding to eternity or enclosing oneself in the pure moment. So I think you can see something like utilitarianism. This is where we throw ourselves into the externality. We become the site of a production of pleasure that enters into a general circulation of pleasure throughout society. So there we're focused just on the human as a site of production, not so much worried about their internality, the irreducible value of their subjectivity and their freedom and all that kind of stuff. It's just, can you, for the external world and for the society in which you live, produce pleasure generally, right? So there it's all about this production. Kant, on the other hand, in deontology goes the other way, where you have this turn inward to subjectivity, where the ethical thing of the most importance is to produce a good will, is to be good sort of within yourself. So it's not an external good that gets circulated through society like pleasure in utilitarianism. It's rather a sort of purely intrinsic good that comes from your own willing, from your own interiority. So there we have, I think, one side going into the objective, the other side going into the subjective. Beauvoir wants to hold ambiguity in place. So we're not going to try to overcome or collapse this ambiguity. We have to sort of face it soberly. We have to own up to it. That's going to be part of the meaning of authenticity. Authenticity is a can I'm going to kick down the road a little bit, but just know, flag that term, authenticity. That's going to become important. So she acknowledges that in our particular historical moment, which is always important for existentialism, you can't get outside of history or anything like that. It's part of your situation. It's to be responding to a historical moment. She says, men of today seem to feel more acutely than ever the paradox of their condition. They know themselves to be the supreme end to which all action should be subordinated, but the exigencies of action force them to treat one another as instruments or obstacles, as means. The more widespread their mastery of the world, the more they find themselves crushed by uncontrollable forces. So one of the reasons why Beauvoir thinks we need to face this ambiguity head on is modernity, the modern era after the scientific and industrial revolutions, roughly, have really thrown this ambiguity in our face. So we're the masters of the world because of our subjectivity, because we can plan and think about things and rationally order the world, and that allows us to create all kinds of amazing technologies, telecommunications, atomic bombs, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, it reduces us dramatically to sort of objects that can be easily crushed by these achievements. I mean, the atomic bomb is the example that she uses that I think carries a lot of weight with it, because on the one hand, the atomic energy is achieved through the amazing intellectual capability of humans as subjects that have projects of knowledge and engineering and can assert their will onto the world and reshape matter and material into something that they have sort of, cooked up through their creative powers and all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, you drop a bomb on a city and 100,000 people are dead, and that's it. and their objectivity is acted upon. Their body, as just a material fact of the world, is destroyed, and their subjectivity along with it. So you have extreme examples of both human subjectivity, ingenuity, creativity, planning, and here we are in the world as objects, subject to instantaneous annihilation at the hands of our own creation. So the era in which we live, with increasing ecological crises, economic crises, capitalism sort of lurches from recession to recession crises, people savings get wiped out and all kinds of stuff like that. That historical moment makes us sort of especially aware of this ambiguity, of the power and importance of our subjective state, which clashes with our sort of objective insignificance, that we're a tiny being on a rock hurtling around the sun and all that sort of business. So Beauvoir doesn't just think that this is an abstract philosophical issue, though it is, of course, a general philosophical problem that Beauvoir sees in the history of philosophy. It is also, and probably more importantly for Beauvoir, a very timely problem that we're being forced to face by the situation that we find ourselves in. Here we all are in self-isolation or whatever, despite our best laid plans for how this, semester or whatever was going to go, because of just these external forces that impose themselves on us. And here yet we are still trying to actualize our subjectivity and plans in the face of all of that, kind of stuff. So, again, of philosophical importance formally in the abstract, but also immediate sort of historical importance, that we face this problem, Beauvoir thinks. So she says that existentialism is a philosophy of ambiguity. And she does a little historical overview where she cites Kierkegaard, and of course Sartre, as philosophers of ambiguity who attempted to embrace this problem at the heart of the human condition without reducing it or collapsing one side into the other, or so on. Of course, she will cite Jean-Paul Sartre's being and nothingness throughout the Ethics of Ambiguity. Beauvoir and Sartre were very close. They were romantic partners and intellectual partners, and so she will talk a lot about Sartre's work and being and nothingness in particular throughout. She cites him approvingly a lot. She endorses many of his conclusions, but you also see that she makes some important distinctions and contributions of her own. So usually when she actually says Sartre and being and nothingness, it's a laudatory citation. She's adapting or bringing on some of his work. Other times where she's more critical, it's less explicitly flagged. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. Very interesting intellectual partnership between the two of them here. So one of the key issues of subjectivity, that side of the ambiguity, is that we are beings for ourselves. So we have projects, we have future orientation. What that means, though, because we are spread out over time, we have a past that we have been, that follows us. We have a future that has not yet come, that we can anticipate and into which we project certain possibilities and so on. We never coincide completely with ourselves. We're spread out over time. We, in the moment, are directed toward objects that are not us. What appears to us in the world is distinct from us. So we never totally coincide with ourselves. We do not relate to ourselves through the relationship of identity, right? This is the key to understanding what she means when she talks about to be human is to be a lack, and also the important notion of failure. So I've done another video that you can check out on what it means to be a lack. So that, I'll put a link to that in the details of this video. In the failure business, so humans are always trying to be something, but because we are never self-coincident, we can also never coincide with one particular being. We're always failing to sort of match up with the thing that we desire or the thing that we want to be. And she thinks that this goes right down to the problems of our perception. She emphasizes that ethics begins in failure. Without failure, no ethics. For a being who, from the very start, would be an exact coincidence with himself in a perfect plenitude, the notion of having to be would have no meaning. That you have to be something. Well, if you were a perfect plenitude, if you were just a being in itself, there would be nothing you would have to be. You just would be what you were, and there would be no changing it. So you don't have to worry about what you have to be, because you just are what you are, and there's no having to be anything. You are what you have to be already. You don't have to work toward anything. Now, she does go on to elaborate, it's necessary for the failure to be surmounted. An existentialist ontology does not allow this hope. Man's passion is useless. He has no means for becoming the being that he is not. So we're always in this process. We're always in progress. We're always self-overcoming and becoming what we are not by moving into the future. I am something right now. Maybe I'm feeling hungry, and I say I am hungry, but I'll go and I'll try to overcome that. I'll find some food and I'll eat it, and then I won't be hungry anymore. So I'll have become what I'm not. Right now, I am hungry, but I want to become not hungry by eating something, right? So this failure is built into the human condition, that we will try, but we will never be able to fully coincide with this being that we seek. So she says the failure described in being and nothingness is definitive, but it's ambiguous. So she quotes Sartre, a being who makes himself a lack of being in order that there might be being. That means, first of all, that his passion is not inflicted upon him from without. He chooses it. It is his very being, and as such, does not imply the idea of unhappiness. So this failure doesn't mean that we're doomed or condemned to be unhappy or anything like that. It's the very condition by which we can sort of act in the world, and it's something for which we have to take responsibility for. That's why she emphasizes a being who makes himself a lack. So we are the ultimate sort of source and ground of this negation. I empty myself so that objects can appear to me. That's what it means. Make himself a being who makes himself a lack in order that there might be being. So in order for things to appear to me, I have to be sort of empty. I have to be a nothingness to which something can appear as a presence. I have to have that initial act of negation. Again, I explain this in more detail in the video about being a lack. It's an important concept, and it was worth sort of its own explainer video, so that we didn't get too sidetracked here. It's clear that in the Ethics of Ambiguity, Beauvoir takes some of the philosophical work done in being and nothingness sort of for granted. So you'd need some of that background there. So I think just initially, to get off of the ground with the Ethics of Ambiguity, you have to see the ambiguity that she's outlining, that human beings appear both as subject and as object. As a subject, we are for ourselves. As an object, we are in itself. Because of this ambiguity, because we appear in the world in these two ways, we'll never coincide with ourselves. We'll never be reducible to just a being or one kind of thing, because we are a certain kind of, we are a thing in our objectivity. There are certain definitive aspects, concrete aspects about us. But as a for itself, we're always in negotiation with them. We're always changing them, coming back to them, reinterpreting them, reintegrating them into our new situation, projecting into a future. So we're caught between these two poles. And what we're going to try to do in authenticity is get them to kind of play nice with each other, or coordinate them in a kind of harmonious way. The problem is that philosophy has wanted to ignore one side or the other, or collapse everything into one side. Beauvoir wants to maintain that ambiguity. In order to maintain that, we have to recognize that ethics really begins with this failure of our self-coincidence, that we will never totally coincide with the object, and will never totally coincide with ourselves. We'll never coincide with the object that we perceive ourselves to be. Right? In order to become self-conscious, you have to be able to take yourself as an object of perception, right? So you have to become a kind of object of your own experience in order to be self-aware. So again, that failure is important for ethics, but we don't have to necessarily read it as right out of the gate like a bad thing, because this failure is also the very ground. It's where our possibilities come from. Right, it's the font of our possibilities in the world. If we totally coincided with the object, if this failure didn't exist, we would never become anything. We would never have anything that we had to be or had to strive for. We could just sit in our, just inert like a rock, just being what we were, without any concern for the future or of change or possibilities or anything like that. So the failure is important, and of course it can be a sort of a bad thing sometimes. It raises certain problems for us, but you don't have to think of it necessarily as like, oh, a failure, I'm a failure, right? So that's an important sort of condition to keep in mind as we move forward. So I think I'll stop there with this first video on the ethics of ambiguity. And we'll pick up next talking a bit about the conversion, this idea of the conversion. So I'll spend a little time just explaining what she means by an existential conversion in its relationship to the Stoic and the phenomenological reduction that she talks about. Okay. All right, I'm looking forward to this. I really enjoy this book a lot. I think it has a lot to offer us. So thanks.